Let's begin by telling you that human rights lawyer Dele Farotimi has been granted 30 million naira bail by a magistrate court in Ekiti State. The court also asked Farotimi to provide 3 sureties with a landed property within the jurisdiction. He was told to refrain from media interview and to submit his international passport, while the case has been adjourned till February 13, 2025. Farotimi is being prosecuted before a chief magistrate's court in Ado-Ekiti, Ekiti State, for allegedly defaming a senior advocate of Nigeria, Afe Babalola. The arrest of the activist sparked public criticisms, with many Nigerians calling for his immediate release. Earlier, National Secretary Youth Rights Campaign Francis Umakpa shared his thoughts on this.
I mean, the condition is stringent, just like, and I see this as part of a broader attempt to continue to clamp down on civil space, continue to witch hunt whistleblowers, continue to shrink, democratic space in Nigeria. I mean, the ruling, asking him not to, grant interview, is draconian. The law is explicit, where, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, grants us, the right to freedom of speech, the right to communicate and all of that. And a judge, sits down and takes away that, that right from you. And I think this need to, the Nigerian Bar Association really need to stand up to, all of these things, where, the rights of citizens are being taken.
The People's Democratic Party in Edo State has hailed the ruling by the High Court in Benin City, which reinstated the chairman and vice chairman of 18 local government areas in the state. The court declared that the suspension of the local council executives by the Edo State House of Assembly, allegedly influenced by Governor Monday Okpewolo, was illegal and unconstitutional. In its landmark decision, the court directed that the suspension resolution be nullified and ordered the Edo State government, the governor, and the Attorney General to refrain from enforcing it. Edo PDP, in a statement signed by its state chairman, Anthony Azedbemi, called the ruling a victory for democracy, the rule of law, and the people of Edo State. In the meantime, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, has declared the suspension of chairman and vice chairman of the 18 local government areas in Edo State as illegal and unconstitutional. The AGF, who spoke to journalists in Abuja on Thursday, stressed that removing from office or suspending any elected local government official in the country was the prerogative of councillors in the said local government area. The Justice Minister said his position was based on the July 11 judgments of the Supreme Court that granted autonomy to 774 local government areas in the country. He said his initial reluctance to react to the development was because he wanted to know the basis upon which the local government area officials in Edo State were reportedly suspended. The Edo State House of Assembly suspended the chairman and vice chairman of the local government areas for 2 months over their alleged gross misconduct and insubordination. Earlier, legal practitioner Maitama shared his thoughts on this.
I'm very happy and proud that we now have an Attorney General that can speak the truth to power, notwithstanding which side is doing what is wrong. That is what Prince Lateef Fagbemi has just displayed yesterday. Prince Lateef Fagbemi, senior advocate of Nigeria, not just senior advocate, very highly senior advocate of Nigeria. Now, don't forget, before now, the Nigerian system, we have the federal system, we have the state and the local government. And all of these various components are all recognized under the Constitution. Now you have the federal government, which is at the center. Then you have the state, and then you have the local government, which we say is closer to the people. Now, Section 7 of the Constitution, Sub 1, has always recognized the fact that the local government must always be administered by democratically elected officials and not. Now, when you say democratically elected, it means caretaker committee is unknown to our constitution.
The Nigerian Judiciary, criminal justice experts have called for more training of stakeholders responsible for implementing the nation's administration of criminal justice law in the country. This was during a two-day workshop in Benin City, the Edo State capital, focusing on achieving a national minimum standard for the effective implementation of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act in various states of the nation. Stakeholders at the workshop lauded significant improvements in Nigeria's criminal justice sector, saying that the act is gradually challenging inherent errors in the justice sector.
Let us hold our own side of wherever you are working. I'm in the judiciary. I'm happy I can see my yeah. We hold our side. NDA should hold their side. DSS should hold their side. The lawyers should.
Programs like this have also gotten states who have enacted who have domesticated the ACJA.
The essence of this training is to assess the level of the adoption of minimum standards in Edo State, and also this program is ongoing in different states in Nigeria.
Away from judicial matters now, the Nigeria Labour Congress has kicked against the alleged exclusion of labor unions in the formulation of the new tax policy by the federal government. Labour urged the National Assembly to halt deliberation on the proposed legislations until wider consultations were made on critical aspects. It said workers who are one of the critical stakeholders of any tax regime were not consulted by the initiators of the new tax reform bills, describing the said exclusion as unacceptable and as undermining the principles of tax justice. Organized labor made its position known in a communique issued after its National Executive Council meeting held in Owerri, Imo State, and signed by the NLC President Joe Ajaero and the General Secretary Emmanuel Uduaja. Away from that, the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, has given owners of the 762 plots of land in Maitama II District, Cadastral Zone A10, Abuja, a fresh 2-week ultimatum to pay for their certificates of occupancy or risk final revocation of their allocation. This was disclosed in a statement on Friday by Senior Special Assistant on Public Communications and New Media, Lere Olayinka. He said Wike reiterated that the primary interest was not for people to lose their lands, but to get them to make necessary payments to the government. This fresh ultimatum comes a day after Wike revoked lands belonging to former President Muhammadu Buhari, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajudeen Abbas, and the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akume. Also, 759 other prominent figures and organizations in Maitama II in Abuja were also affected by the revocation, which was for non-payment of certificates of occupancy. In the meantime, the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, has assured residents of the capital that the administration is ready to provide 24-hour security and surveillance during the festive celebrations. The minister made this known after a meeting with security operatives on plans being put in place to ensure that criminals do not take advantage of the Christmas and New Year festivities. Also, the Commissioner of Police for the Federal Capital Territory assured that security agencies will not let their guards down as they will work together to ensure that citizens can go about their normal activities during the Yuletide.
We want to intensify our activities in all the borders, as well as exits, entrance into the Federal Capital Territory. We want to synergize with the neighboring states. We are concentrating on all the pushes around. The Nigerian Air Force are bringing in their helicopters to assist with surveillance of areas identified. Nigerian Army, the police, civil defense are ready in a lot of these pushes, which I will not want to mention now, even as I speak with you, conducting clearance operations.
We are prepared to provide security say, well, things are very much okay now. We continue to be vigilant to make sure that there's no room for anybody to manipulate.
As part of its post-insurgency recovery strategy, the Borno State government has launched a new phase of teacher training for over 1,000 educators across 7 local council areas. The initiative seeks to address the acute shortage of skilled teachers and improve learning outcomes in schools affected by years of insurgency. New Central's Omari Karawa completes the report.
A check presentation by the state government marks the commencement of the Phase 5 teacher training. These, according to the Borno State government, is to improve the standards of education that was affected by years of insurgency in the region.
After this program, 50,000 naira will be given to every participant for them to go and mobilize and come back to this training January 6th. Not only that, His Excellency has also given 30,000 for every month of stay. 90 plus 50 plus transport, approximately 180,000 will be spent on everybody here. In addition to free tuition, free materials, everything free. What does the government want? Just be serious.
The government has implemented the minimum wage. I don't want to say the minimum wage without calling the figure, because you might think it's the 30,000. It is the 70,000 minimum wage, which His Excellency has implemented to teachers and the health workers in Borno State.
Leaders of the NLC, TUC, and local government authorities appreciated government decision to integrate teachers who did not pass their prior training.
As Labour, we will not allow the ministry to sack a single teacher because of this competency test, which they agree, and we sign a letter, which after the competency test, again he promised us those that fail, that need training will go for training. I would ask him, if you did not give them this training, we will switch back and come back and then start to talk on the table so that we know what we are going to do for them.
Let us have it at the back of our mind that this generation which we are training will be the one who will come and take over from us. They will be the one who will come and train our children and generation yet unborn. So please, let us do our best.
One major issue of concern discussed during the training is the absconding of classes by teachers, which the government insisted decisive action will be taken.
To za mu haɗa kai mu ga wannan education ta samu ci gaba a wannan effort namu.
With the quest for the educational recovery in Nigeria state of Borno remains on course, the ratio of teacher to student remains another priority area. In Maiduguri for News Central, Umaru Kirawa.
Many thanks for being there. Earlier on the news, we told you that the Nigerian Labour Congress kicked against the exclusion of the labor unions from the deliberations that brought to light the new tax policies. And now to give more perspective to this, I'm being joined by a business and public policy analyst, Kenneth Ikena. Mr. Ikena, it's nice to have you around on the news.
Good evening. Nice having you on. Nice having me on, rather.
Of course. So will the tax reform bills have made more meaning and not met huge resistance if the labor unions had been carried along in deliberations?
Well, when you look at the composition of the members of the committee who were key to drafting this recent bill on the behalf of this government, I would say to a very great extent, except I have to go back. Great extent, major stakeholders were factored into that committee, were made part and parcel of that committee. And so to what extent that the labor unions, not just the labor union movement, are actually now saying that they were not made a part and parcel of it is still, something that is subject to scrutiny. But I think a committee that even factored in putting in the president of the Nigerian Students Tax Association, I mean, I think it was fair, it was wide, it shows that it was a committee that looked for broad consultation on the tax that was given to them, and they brought in as many people as possible. But if the labor unions now come up to say that they were not put at the forefront of this and they were not factored in to be seen as major catalysts, it's also their right to say so, because when you talk of taxes, taxes have a great influence on the way that members of different labor unions that come together in the melting pot of this main labor trade unions in Nigeria are affected. Taxes are very important. So we should take a look at their grievances again, but also put country ahead of personal interests, personal ambitions, and let's see how we can, come to the table and forge the country and its affairs forward in terms of revenue generation, and most importantly, the fair distribution of revenue that is generated.
But then, Kenneth, the reform bills are said to be actually people-centric and would favor small businesses who are being exempted from certain taxes. One would expect that the labor union would support such reform bills, don't you think?
Fantastic aspects and facets of the new reform bills to see to it that most small businesses are exempted from paying tax. But I would just say that is an audio exemption if I want to speak the truth to power and the truth to the facts that are actually on ground. Most small businesses pay what I call multiplex taxes, taxes that come in different forms, taxes that go to local governments, taxes that go to owners of the land, taxes that I don't even want to begin to think of mentioning right now, even from the point of where they have to source their goods and source their materials to be able to make goods and services available to customers out there. So there should be a more holistic approach to seeing that that small businesses actually benefit from this exemption system. But even when they benefit, what is in it for them? When they benefit, what is in it for those that patronize these small businesses? So it's a good point to say that if small businesses that actually make up about 60 to 70% of the economy are exempted from this, why should anybody be crying foul? It is obviously because we know that when some of these policies are formulated, it does not factor in the particularities and the peculiarities of the Nigerian business environment that makes all forms and shades of taxes, rates and so on and so forth, to be paid by individuals without having anybody to actually complain to. So there's still more room for deeper reforms, and there's still more room to still carry everybody along. It is important that we have everybody on board so that we can, have a blueprint that is satisfactory to all and that is promising of economic growth, economic development, the fair distribution of the Commonwealth that will be generated from taxes, and distributive justice going forward. That will serve the purpose of social equity going forward as well.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, Kenneth, one of the things that the government said was that they are seeking to broaden the tax base, simplify compliance, improve revenue generation and collection, and strengthen fiscal federalism, part of the things that you mentioned. But then you still expressed a bit of skepticism in how that can be achieved. So I'm wondering if you can share with us, apart from ink on paper, in terms of the possibility, the workability now, what the government needs to do to see that what is being said translates into something that is feasible.
All right, when new policies and new reforms like this come into play, it's very important that we look at not just the possibility, we look at the feasibility, the suitability, the workability, and the validity of certain aspects and facets of that reform, as it were. Now, let me take the viewers back to the classroom and take you back to some 200 years ago. The great economist Adam Smith did say that there are 4 canons of taxation. And so if a reform of this nature is actually going to achieve the all-centered, people-centric purpose, it must fulfill these 4 canons, and in addition to that, at least one other canon. And the first is equity. To what extent does this new reform bill of tax actually guarantee equity in the system? Now, when it comes to equity, should we be talking more about equity, or should we be talking more about Pareto optimality, which in other words, in economics, we refer to as social efficiency? So how efficient will be the system? Then the other thing that will make it workable, suitable, and feasible is whether there is actual certainty. as we speak, there is no certainty to the fact that what applies to the goods will apply to the gander, and what applies to one section of the country will apply to another section of the country, and there will be fair generation of tax and fair distribution of the proceeds according to what is being presented. Secondly, will it be convenient? I've done some consulting for some tax authorities, and I'm aware of the new technology in place to make paying of taxes very, very convenient. But we still see people going from shops to shop with forms of different revenue services. How convenient is that? And then lastly, which is a Nigerian problem, how economical and how efficient will it be? Will we be spending 10 million on operations to generate taxes of 7 billion, which for all purposes and intent comes to a deficit? And lastly, does it in fact and indeed guarantee fiscal adequacy? If these four canons, if these four pillars and canons of taxation are not in place, and if they are not well addressed by this new incoming bill, then I think that there's still going to be a lot of problems with terms of implementation, with terms of compliance, and in terms of administration. So let's get these 4-5 canons right, and then let's bring everybody to the table, and then let's push for everybody to start looking at how to be more creative and drive innovation in different nooks and crannies of the country, and then it will be all smiles and prosperity for us all. I'm certain of that, at least.
Well, thank you so much. It's quite interesting that we have a Nigerian problem. I don't know if Argentina has an Argentinian problem with what the president has done in terms of rejuvenating the economy in the last couple of months. But then thank you so much, Kenneth Ikena, a business and public policy analyst, for sharing your profound thoughts with us on the news.
Always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Away from tax policy, we now talk about environmental pollution. A coalition of civil society organizations has called on President Bola Tinubu and the National Assembly to immediately suspend the divestment of oil assets in the nation's Niger Delta region. The coalition says that the action by oil companies divesting their assets are detrimental to the environment and the well-being of local communities. In a petition addressed to President Tinubu and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the group called on government to ensure that multinational companies take responsibility for decades of environmental damage done to the region, conduct a transparent review, and commit to remediation efforts before the approval of divestment efforts.
We are compelled to raise our voices one more time against the ongoing and potentially catastrophic divestment process by international oil companies, IOCs, operating in the Niger Delta, particularly Shell's proposed sale of its remaining shares in Shell Petroleum Development Company, SPDC, to the Renaissance Consortium. Despite NUPRC's initial rejection of this sale based on legitimate concerns, the President appears to be moving swiftly towards approving these divestments by passing what we consider as the valid and urgent concerns raised by the National Assembly and the Nigerian people. That is why we are calling on the National Assembly to prevail on the President to respect the voice of the people.
Bringing you stories from Africa, presidents of the Republic of Benin Republic, well, of course, Patrice Talon says no political compromise detrimental to the development of the country will be considered to please anyone or satisfy any political consensus. The president said this while delivering his end-of-year State of the Nation address to the Assembly. He declared that Benin Republic has found its way and proclaimed what he described as an end to the usurpation of political power by incompetent and ill-intentioned sellers of illusions.
Le Bénin, notre pays, a trouvé son chemin. Et cela est irréversible. Peu importe l'opinion et le souhait des nostalgiques en quête d'un retour à notre passé honteux. L'usurpation du pouvoir politique par des vendeurs d'illusions incompétents et mal intentionnés. Aucun compromis politique préjudiciable à notre développement ne sera concédé pour faire plaisir à qui que ce soit ou satisfaire un quelconque consensus politique. le Bénin est au-dessus de tout. La démocratie et la compétition politique devront désormais être exclusivement et absolument au service du développement. Vive le progrès, vive le Bénin.
Mozambique is braced for an escalation in protests after the announcement due by Monday of final results of a disputed election, a turning point in 2 months of unrest that has killed 130 people and caused a major disruption. Opposition leader Venancio Mondlane has threatened chaos if the Constitutional Council validates the initial results that found he came second in the October 9 votes to the candidates of the ruling Frelimo party. The council is, however, expected to sign off on the results of the Election Commission, which said that Mondlane won 20% compared to 71% for Daniel Chapo, the Frelimo candidate. Mondlane says the count was rigged in favor of Frelimo, and a separate count shows that he won 53% to 36% for Chapo. The dispute has sparked an explosion of unrest in the impoverished southern African nation. In the meantime, the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Mozambique has called on South Africa to spearhead the process to resolving the impasse in Mozambique following the recent elections. This follows the South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, meeting with his Mozambican counterparts during the week. According to the Center for Democracy and Human Rights, the situation in the country is negatively affecting the SADC region, hence the call for the African Union to also help find the solution. To discuss this, we're joined by the Director of the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Mozambique, Professor Adriano Luvunga. Thank you so much, Professor Luvunga, for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening to you too. What is your assessment of the current human rights situation in Mozambique occasioned by the recent elections?
The situation is dire. About 131 people have been killed. Hundreds have been injured, thousands have been arbitrarily detained, and there is a state of fear in the country as we are moving into the pronunciation of the results by the Constitutional Council this Monday. As you know, the presidential candidate, Venancio Mondlane, he has announced that if results that are going to be announced, they will not speak to the information that he has won the election. There will be what he called the V8 demonstrations, which we fear that it will generate into further loss of lives, into escalation of the violence, with the disruption of the functioning of country and society.
Okay, but then instead of having the ratification of the election results done, don't you think in a way to avert the impending violence that might happen in the country, there should be a provision of the materials for ballots, probably for a recount?
That is too late for that. It's too late. First, this election, it was held on the 9th of October. It has been 2 months and a half now, and no result as yet. Second, the manipulation of the elections is such that it is not possible to come up with a result that will do justice to the people of Mozambique. In view of this, we have been calling for dialogue that would lead into a compromise amongst the various candidates to agree on a path forward. That's where we have been suggesting that South Africa, being the big brother in the region, and other entities, SADC and the African Union, should have a long time ago come in to help Mozambique steer a path forward. So it is too late for that, because today is Friday. On Monday, there will be the pronunciation of the results that we all know that are not credible, are not legitimate, are not legal. They will not do justice for the people of Mozambique. And we fear that that will generate into an escalation of violence.
So I'm wondering what kind of truce or compromise you would expect a man who feels he has been robbed of his mandate would be. But then we're still seeing cases of human rights violations in Mozambique. And if you want South Africa to step in, looking at these two areas, what would you expect the big brother, so to speak, in this context to do to bring about stability and peace, not only in Mozambique, but of course in the region?
There is a lot that South Africa could have done. I know that my president, in various occasions, President Nyusi, he said that Mozambique's crisis, it's a domestic crisis. Hence, it is in the hand of the Mozambican people to address that crisis. That is not correct. And he went to the Harare summit of SADC also to say that this is a domestic crisis and Mozambican people, they will address it. That is not correct. It's not correct because this crisis is no longer a domestic crisis. It has resulted in the disruption of economic activities in the region. Look at the Lebombo border in the Maputo corridor. Look at the Beira corridor. Look at the Nacala corridor. All these, they are vital corridors, not only for Mozambique, but for the region, for the SADC region. So looking at this, you cannot say that this is still a domestic. But secondly, Mozambique's election, if you measure against the SADC protocol on good governance and elections, you will clearly see that it falls short to meet the minimum required to be a credible election. And with that happening, and considering that about 131 people have been killed, and knowing that one person is too much to be allowed to be killed because of political instability, there is a lot that South Africa could have done. There is a lot that SADC could have done. There is a lot that the African Union could have done, but they have failed to come and help Mozambique. They failed partly because they look at Mozambique from a Frelimo perspective. So you see the ANC, you see the ZANU-PF, you see the CCM in Tanzania, you see the SWAPO in Namibia, the MPLA in Angola. All these, they look at us as Frelimo subjects.
Okay.
They are not looking at us.
Okay, I understand. Well, they usually say that a stitching time saves 9. Let's see, maybe last intervention by South Africa will be able to stem the impending crisis in Mozambique. Thank you so much, Professor Adriano Novunga, Human Rights Mozambique Director, Center of Democracy, for sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate that. Let's move on now. France began withdrawing its soldiers from Chad on Friday after N'Djamena abruptly ended military cooperation with its former colonial power last month. A contingent of 120 soldiers departed for France from a military airport in the capital 10 days after French fighter aircraft left the Sahelian country. Chad had been a key link in France's military presence in Africa and its last foothold in the wider Sahel region, following the forced withdrawal of its troops from Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger Republic in the wake of a series of military coups. However, on November 28, Chad announced its decision to terminate a defense accord with Paris, which primarily dated back to the country's independence in 1960. Outside of Africa, we tell you that Beijing's foreign ministry said on Friday that no country should regard its island countries as their backyard when asked about Australia and the Solomon Islands agreement to strengthen the island nation's police force. The agreement includes a multi-year funding, training and infrastructure package for the Solomon Islands, which has fostered close ties with China. However, in a sign of competition it faces from Beijing, the Solomons police announced on the same day that it had received a modest donation from China for its police support fund. The Australian deal, valued at 190 million Australian dollars over 4 years, will include the construction of a new police training center in the Solomons capital, Honiara.
任何国家都不应该将岛国当作自己的后院，而是要优势互补、协调配合，开展三方或多方合作。我们希望有关方能切实尊重岛国的独立和主权完整，不要干涉岛国的内政。
Talking business now, Bitcoin fell below $100,000 as part of a broader decline in speculative investments after the Federal Reserve indicated increased caution regarding potential future interest rate cuts. As of 10 a.m. on Thursday in Singapore, the digital asset was down approximately 1% to $99,800, following a significant 5.1% drop on Wednesday, the largest decline since September. In light of this downturn, Ola Toshe, CEO of CoinCoin Exchange, shares his thoughts on whether he sees any long-term complications for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies due to the Fed's cautious approach to future interest rate reductions on Business Edge.
Are taking sort of a long-term approach with Bitcoin. They see that Bitcoin has done quite well since its inception in 2013, I believe, or maybe a little earlier. And a lot of investors, again, are taking that long-term approach. They're not willing to sort of look at Bitcoin and say, well, hey, you know, it's dropping, you know, we've seen a drop. Should we be concerned? You know, that sort of stuff. Look, this happens in all markets. It's happening to Bitcoin right now. For your seasoned investor, they're taking a long-term approach. A lot of the larger funds, you know, allocated a small part of their portfolio to Bitcoin, you know, and their exposure to Bitcoin, again, is limited. But of course, we have to look at the fundamentals of Bitcoin, and some of those fundamentals are fairly straightforward. There'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. You know, there's a limited supply. So ultimately, over the long term, regardless of what cycles the Fed is going through, there is expected to be a continued rise in the price of Bitcoin. And of course, the psychological level of $100,000, whilst that's, you know, a point to be made, I still think that on the sort of long term and the outlook of Bitcoin, is pretty good. You know, we're still more than double where we were this time last year. So I think a lot of traders and investors are looking at that as, you know, thus far good news for Bitcoin.
In sports, with just hours to go before Tyson Fury's World Heavyweight Championship clash with Alexander Usyk, the rival camps are locked in a dispute over a replacement official. Fernando Barbosa had been due to be one of the 3 judges to fight on the fight night, but he was unable to travel to Riyadh due to illness. 2 officials, Steve Westfield and Ignacio Robles, have been flown in to replace him, but the respective fighter teams are split on which judge should be used on fight night, with promoter Frank Warren suggesting a coin toss should settle the issue. Another key point of contention at Friday's rules meeting were the length of Fury's beard. In professional boxing, beards normally have to be kept trimmed and of a certain length. Usyk's team queried whether Fury's full beard could actually cushion a blow. The decision was made in Fury's favor, and he will not be obligated to shave it off for the fight. We also tell you that former WBC Super Bantamweight boxing champion Thierry Jacob has passed away at the age of 59, according to the mayor of his hometown, Calais. Jacob claimed the WBC title in 1992 by defeating Mexico's Daniel Zaragoza in front of his home crowd. He turned professional in 1984 and retired in 1994 with a record of 39 wins and 6 losses. His son, Romain Jacob, followed in his footsteps, winning the European Super Featherweight title in 2014. The news of his death was shared by Natasha Bokat, the mayor of Calais, who expressed sorrow over the untimely loss. And that's all at this hour. Before we go, we'll look at our top stories again. Human rights lawyer Dele Farotimi has been granted bail in a resumed sitting at the FCT Magistrate Court. PDP has lauded High Court ruling on restatement of a Dodoko government chairman. We also told you that Mozambique is bracing for escalation in protests after announcement of final results of disputed election on Monday. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times, channel 274, Evo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Lekon Onabanjo.